Welcome to the Magical Overthinkers podcast, a show for thought spiralers, exploring the subjects we can't stop overthinking about, from narcissism to burnout. If you ever get the feeling that despite living in the information age, the world only seems to be making less sense, or that for some mysterious reason, it just feels especially hard to exist as a human in the world right now, then you're in the right place. This podcast is here to help us think less about the things that don't matter and more about the things that do. I'm your host, Amanda Montel. Today, we're overthinking about layoffs. The other week, I was in San Francisco visiting my brother, who works at Pixar, and we realized that I'd never seen the campus before. So he brought me there, and we were going on a little tour. It was the week that Inside Out 2 was coming out, and so you'd think that morale on the Pixar campus would be really high, but everybody sort of seemed like they were in the doldrums. Quickly, it became clear why. In between my brother pointing out the Inside Out 2 exhibit and the outdoor amphitheater, he would gesture to someone he recognized and say, "Oh yeah, that's so-and-so. He's so nice. He's worked here for 25 years. Yeah, he just got laid off." A massive round of layoffs had just happened at Pixar, days before Inside Out 2 was coming out. You think they could have waited. It should have been such a celebratory time, but the feeling on campus was really somber, and I was especially jarred by the fact that these folks who'd just been laid off were still hanging around campus. I asked my brother why he thought that was, and he said, "I don't know, I guess they're just saying goodbye. Their whole life has been here." And it's true, in American society, we are really conditioned to pour so much of our sense of self, our pursuit of purpose into our work life. Especially at a place like Pixar, you perceive your fellow employees as your family members, all contributing to this passionate mission of making art. But no matter what industry that you're in, our self-worth is really bound up in our office culture. We spend so much time there. Having a job is really personal in the United States. And so when you get laid off out of nowhere, even if the HR person on the other side of that Zoom call or meeting assures you, it's not you, we're restructuring, or it's a profitability issue, you can't help but perceive it as intensely personal and like some sort of existential threat, that you've chosen the wrong path, that you've poured so much of yourself into a company that doesn't give a shit about you, that maybe everything you've ever done in your professional life is one big mistake. It is such a recipe for thought spiraling. Layoffs are a significant subject of discussion, at least in my personal circles right now. My brother lost so many of his colleagues and friends to those Pixar layoffs. Other people close to me in various industries have had to contend with layoffs recently. According to a CBS News piece titled, "The Job Market is Strong, so why did layoffs double in January?" January 2024 saw the biggest spike in national layoffs that we've seen since January of 2009 during the Great Recession. It's been especially jarring to see even companies with robust balance sheets like Meta and Amazon and Citigroup laying off so many employees. They say layoffs have become this strategic tool for companies to cut costs or address some kind of short-term financial issue. And yet, according to a 2024 piece about layoffs published in Forbes by the reporter Ann Kowal-Smith, layoffs actually create significant stress and anxiety among both those who've been laid off and those who remain, affecting morale, like the somber tone I immediately noticed on Pixar's campus, and long-term productivity. In my brother, I definitely noticed some survivor's guilt, feeling terrible for the person on his small team who was forced to leave, feeling like it should have been him. And of course, when there are these massive layoffs, plenty of employees start to feel jittery and unmotivated, like they could be next. A 2023 Vox piece titled "Why Mass Layoffs Are Destroying Job Security and the Future of Work" said that layoffs take a major psychological toll. They can even increase the risk of physical health issues like heart attacks. It's weird. I get the feeling that layoffs are this major crisis in our culture right now, but I keep seeing in headlines that economists are saying the job market is really strong, that wages are actually overcoming inflation at the moment. It's hard to square what I'm reading about and what I'm feeling anecdotally. Part of what might make this wave of layoffs feel worse than it might even be objectively has to do with the jarring juxtaposition of what your job is supposed to mean to you these days and how people are being laid off. I read in a 2024 Inc. piece titled How Layoff Culture is Destroying Tech Companies that people's layoff anxiety is worsening because of the extremely impersonal layoff methods that companies are employing, like sending emails or suddenly making your work accounts inaccessible, all on the heels of withholding regular feedback and oftentimes a total lack of transparency from upper management. It feels like you've been blindsided with a breakup out of nowhere, but that you're not supposed to feel bad about it because it's quote unquote just a job. It's a very mindfucky, thought spirally experience, especially because there's so much mixed messaging when it comes to the job market. Another Vox piece titled Why Mass Layoffs Are Destroying Job Security and the Future of Work contends that job security is actually a relatively modern concept, that it emerged strongly after World War II due to the economic growth and strong labor unions at the time. And at that point, layoffs were framed as a last resort. But they've increasingly become more common and accepted in contemporary culture. The gig economy and temporary work have become more common, which might reflect a general mistrust in the stability that long-term employment is supposed to yield. And yet all these economists are saying that unemployment is really low right now. It also bears mentioning that while I absolutely want to validate any and all thought spirals regarding capitalism and uncertainty surrounding employment, I also want to be careful not to catastrophize or paint the economy in a way that suggests apocalypse. Macroeconomics is certainly not my expertise, and honestly seems to be highly mysterious even to experts. But broadly, the US job market doesn't seem to be in a place of all-out catastrophe, even if in certain moments it may feel like it is. Those doomy feelings are the very magical overthinking that this podcast is all about and takes very seriously. But from what I can tell, the current job market is not at an end-of-the-world place, and to frame it as such would be to perhaps engage in the sort of declinist doomsaying that allows political despots to come to power at worst. That just felt like an important point for me to make at this particular time in history. At the center of all of this messaging around layoffs, I think, is this feeling of intense shame. Shame if you've been laid off, shame if you feel bad about it, shame if you're not able to pivot or accommodate, shame if you have layoff trauma. To deep dive into a conversation about layoffs, parsing through the confusion and soothing our thought spirals about them, I want to introduce my very special guest. Yowei Shaw is an award-winning podcast host and producer who spent many years making the NPR show Invisibilia before she was laid off. In the wake of that layoff, she now hosts and produces a new podcast called Proxy that just featured a whole series about layoffs. So I hope you enjoy this very personal and yet analytical discussion about the subject which so many of us can't stop spiraling about. Thank you so much for joining the Magical Overthinkers podcast. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your work to our listeners?
Hello, I'm Yowei Shaw. I used to work at NPR and was the host of Invisibilia. And then I got laid off, and then I made a podcast series about getting laid off, and I have a new show called Proxy. It's a show about answering your niche emotional questions by proxy. What the hell does that mean? Just like we love to set guests up with strangers who have shared experience, and through that process, hopefully you get less stuck by the end.
Yeah, I think you called yourself an emotional investigative reporter.
Oh my gosh, why didn't I start with that? Yes, I'm calling myself an emotional investigative journalist, mainly because I think it's funny, but also because I want to take emotions seriously. I feel like there's this niche that's not being filled, which is like, you go to therapy. Therapy's great, but like your therapist usually isn't doing research about your particular problem, and you're not getting to like talk to people necessarily who have shared experience or are on the other side of your story.
Yeah. Oh, God. It's so my kink. Like, as someone who lives in my head, your work really resonates, as they say. I want to start, though, with the first question that I pose to all my magical overthinkers guests, which is simply, what is an irrational thought spiral that's currently living rent-free in your head?
I've been thinking about this, and really the one that's on repeat the most is just like, did I make a huge mistake starting a new show? If I fail, will everyone laugh at me behind my back and be like, yeah, you deserve to be laid off?
Oh, shit.
I know it's a really mean thought spiral.
Yeah,
that I try
really
to keep at
mean.
bay.
You know what? A family member of mine just passed away. This guy who married into the family, and I didn't actually know him very well. I swear I have a point. My mom attended his funeral, and he was a guy who he didn't wear his personality on his sleeve, but all these people who'd known him for a really long time in a very specific context spoke at his funeral. And he was a guy who apparently had all these little very sweet, endearing, clever phrases and little Hemingway-esque aphorisms that he would say to people. And one of them was, if we were parting ways, I would say something like, hey, be nice to Yowei. She's a friend of mine, really good friend of mine. You know? And it's I keep thinking about that. That is such a simple thing to say to someone, and so sort of humble and folksy, but
Yeah.
in this moment, I want to be like, hey, be nice to Yowei. She's a friend of mine.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, no, it makes me think of that RuPaul suggestion to put a photo of your childhood self, have that as your phone background screen to remind yourself to be nice to your younger self.
Then that just makes me think of that funny meme that I keep seeing circulate, which is would my 16-year-old self be proud of me? Why do I care what a mentally ill child thinks?
Oh, touche. Love that. That's true.
It's important to have these sort of counter narratives because none of them are correct, but it's important to have them all. Okay, layoffs. Could you explain a little more about how you decided to turn your personal story into a professional pursuit?
Yes. I was thinking that this podcast in particular is the perfect podcast to talk about layoffs because the whole experience of feeling crushed by your layoff is an overthinking thought spiral. Mm-hmm. And that's something you have to battle. Okay, so basically what happened was I worked at NPR and Invisibilia for 7 years as the host. NPR had troubles, right? Almost every media company is having troubles. Had a massive budget shortfall last year, and they said they needed to lay 10% of us off, and I was one of the unlucky ones. And basically, getting laid off, it sucks. That's pretty obvious. Losing your livelihood, that's really scary. Nobody wants to be rejected like that. And so I knew it was going to hurt, but I did not expect for it to hurt this bad and for this long. There's this disconnect between my intellectual self and my emotional self.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, intellectually, I was okay, I know I had about as good of a layoff as I could get because of our excellent union contract. I got severance. I had advance notice. I got, health care benefits for a few months. I didn't have kids to feed. I had savings. Also, I had 15 years of podcast experience under my belt. So, I probably would get another job and be fine. And then, the kicker was they always tell you it's not about you. That's literally in the definition of what a layoff is. It's a no-fault termination. And they say it just needed to happen because of, company issues. Nothing to do with your performance. But my experience after my layoff was just circling and circling in my head, just wanting to solve this mystery of why me, finding reasons to justify the layoff. Was that mistake the one that did it? And I also just felt so much shame. I'm somebody who has been reporting on feelings and, idea. This is my jam. And so I knew that I needed to surround myself with my people and that my people, my friends and family were supportive. They love me. They don't think of me differently. But my emotional experience was to walk through the world like a video game character whose points had gone way down. Exactly. That's exactly the sound. And just like I would hide from people. I hid in a bathroom at many a party. Like I literally felt like people were looking at me differently. Basically, I was like, this is interesting. This doesn't make sense. And so I just pulled the move I've made in the past, which is to report on my feelings.
Yeah.
And so I decided to make this 3-part series about the emotional and mental health toll of layoffs and learned so much and, made a new show.
Hell yeah. And that's why you're here. And I relate to what you've gone through so much. I do not have personal experience with being laid off, but I have lots of personal experience with encountering professional hardships that are very sort of cold and impersonal, but that I take extremely personally, because how could we not, when as creatives or just people living in America, our self-worth is so bound up with our professional success. And also, this connects to this bias that I talk about in my book. Proportionality bias suggests that when we are encountering an enormous calamity, we want to find a cause for that suffering that's proportional to its magnitude. And so to have to accept that, like, chaos be chaosing and capitalism is fucking brutal and it sucks and it doesn't care about your humanity at all, that provides no sense-making narratives. That just doesn't make proportional sense to our brains. We have to be like, no, I caused this somehow. There is a cause. It's as big as the effect. And if I can somehow overthink my way to a perfectly logical, in scare quotes, cause and effect explanation here, then I can control my destiny and everything will make sense. But figuring out the cosmic logic behind something, whether that rationale is real or imaginary, doesn't always make you feel better, I've found.
I wonder if you have this experience where like you have an emotional question, like an intimate question, and then you report on that question. And by the end of it, don't you feel a little better?
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I guess it's just like one tool in a heavy toolkit of ways to feel better. Like, there are totally some days when I am very actively struggling with the thing that I'm covering on this show. And talking to a psychologist or someone like you, I feel much better just because of like the shared experience and that like I'm not alone and I'm not an idiot. I'm not like a ding dong who shouldn't be feeling this. And then there are other days when I just need to like do a cold plunge and take a nap.
Like eat a nice meal, drink a lot of water.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do also want to say that, yes, it's irrational to like fixate on why you got laid off. It's a black box. You don't know why they laid you off. And so you just, like you said, you fill it in with sense-making narratives. But through my reporting, I actually found that there are concrete systems that lead us to feel this way, Americans in particular. The way our hiring system is set up, which is all about like, are you the right fit? Tell me your story in your cover letter. It's very personal. There's this sociologist, Yowei Shaw, who's like studied layoffs, and he argues that because our hiring system in the US is so personalized, when you get let go, of course you're going to like feel like it's personal too.
Yeah.
And he actually did this interesting study where he compared Israeli tech workers with American tech workers who'd been laid off. And the Americans blamed themselves and the Israelis blamed the system. They didn't have the same kind of like, it's me, it's me, it's me, it's me. They were like, it's the government, it's the government, it's the government, it's the government.
Whoa. Okay, how fucked up is it that I instinctively like take pride in that?
What do you mean?
For some reason, masochism, being a woman, I don't fucking know, being an American, I'm like, yeah, blame yourself. That's like the dignified thing to do. That's the responsible thing to do. That's,
right.
I'm damaged. I hate that for me. Okay, I'm so glad you got into it and immediately started quoting sociologists and making sense. Let's back up though, because I want to provide some exposition. And you have unfortunately had to learn a whole lot about layoffs, but as I'm understanding, that has been curative. Could you just go back to basics and kind of define what a layoff is? Like, where does this term come from? And also, how does it differ from being fired?
Layoff was first used in a newspaper in the 1880s, and it actually meant respite or relaxation, which is really funny when you think about that it means the exact opposite today. And so today, it's a euphemism that companies use for permanently terminating your position. And it's important to note that, it's not supposed to be because of the employee's fault. They're terminating you because of issues with the company. Whereas a firing is permanent termination, but it has to do with the employee.
God, the euphemistic language used in the corporate world, that shit lives rent-free in my head.
RIF, reduction in force. Now layoffs have become so charged that human resources and management have come up with other euphemisms for layoff.
Reduction in force, that's inscrutable. It sounds militaristic. I guess that's the point.
Yeah, I don't know if it's an improvement for them.
Can you talk about how different generations have been affected by layoffs? How have layoffs changed, shifted, maybe increased or decreased with the generations, and what's responsible for these changes?
Yeah, so the story is really interesting. Before the 1970s, I learned that companies used to avoid layoffs. It was actually a stain on the company's reputation. So before the 1970s, there were almost no layoffs for white-collar workers. Blue-collar workers might get laid off, but that would be because the economy wasn't doing well. And then when the economy rebounded, they would be hired back. There was also layoffs with seasonal workers, that kind of thing. But then everything flips and gets really bad starting in the 1970s for a couple reasons. So the stories we know about what happened: deregulation, unions get weaker, globalization, job security collapses. And then there's also a shift in which business theory is most popular. So in the past, the most popular business theory is that companies have an obligation to you as the employee and to the community that they're in. And white-collar workers could expect to be with the company for life. But in this new world, starting in the 1970s, the new theory is all about profits. There's this leading economist at the time, Milton Friedman, and he has this ridiculous quote that's the only responsibility of companies is to increase its profits. That's literally the only reason a company exists. And that's when we see this switch from companies having an obligation to their employees and communities to just profits, profits, profits for shareholders. And then there's also this CEO, Jack Welch, who is the CEO of General Electric. He is notorious for reframing layoffs as a business innovation. He laid off over 100,000 workers in his first years. He basically made layoffs cool, something to brag about to investors and shareholders, a sign that you were doing what's necessary.
Yeah, you were a tough guy. You did what you have to for the business, taking names.
Exactly. So now we're in this situation where companies are not bragging about layoffs in the same way like Jack Welch, but we have normalized them. That's the unfortunate situation we're in right now.
Even though companies need workers to thrive, they're prioritizing some fake thing, that being wealth and success, at the expense of the actual real human beings that in theory all of this wealth and success are for? It just doesn't make fucking sense.
Completely upside down. It's bananas.
Can you talk about the industries that are being most affected by layoffs at the current moment?
So first I have a question for you, Amanda.
Yeah.
Do you feel like there are more layoffs happening right now? Do you feel like there's a crisis? What's your sense, just being a person in the world?
I mean, going on vibes, yeah, I feel layoffs in the ether.
I am in the same boat. I actually have a Google alert for layoffs because I was reporting this series, and it is popping off every few days. And I assumed this was the case, that there's a crisis right now. But when I talked to experts, they were the number of layoffs isn't any higher than usual. And like we've been on a general decline since the Great Recession. And like the reason why the vibes are bad around layoffs are because maybe we're seeing them happen in media and tech, which are like high visibility sectors. In terms of the industries that are most hit at the moment, number one, professional and business services. So like attorneys, accountants, that kind of thing. Accommodation and food services. People aren't spending as much money because like inflation, high interest rates, economy slowing down. And then construction for obvious reasons because high interest rates mean the real estate market has slowed down. I guess what I'm saying is layoffs are not as quote unquote bad in terms of hard numbers, but I would argue there's still a crisis because of how normalized they are and like what it can mean for your mental health.
Right.
Also, I would argue that in the US, layoffs can lead to a crisis because we just don't have any cushion for workers. So what happens after you get laid off? Well, there is very little regulation around how layoffs need to go down here. And the little regulation we do have with the WARN Act, there's no enforcement mechanism. It's very easy to get around. And so it's kind of the Wild West out there with layoffs. That's why you hear so many horror stories. Nobody has to really be accountable. And so most companies don't offer severance or advance notice like they do in a lot of other countries. So if you do get severance, that's actually a sign that you had a quote-unquote elite layoff. That's what this expert told me.
Can you explain what the WARN Act is?
Okay, so the WARN Act is basically this federal act that requires companies who have a certain number of employees and are laying off a certain number of those employees in a 30-day period. If you meet those very convoluted, very particular requirements, then the company does need to give advance notice to workers and does need to give a public notice. Every state has a different way of like dealing with the WARN Act. On TikTok, I was seeing that, people are like, whoa, the WARN Act, this is great. Like, this is how you'll know if you're getting laid off. By the time it's on the WARN Act, it's too late because it doesn't actually tell you ahead of time. It tells you basically what the workers already know, that they will lose their job in 60 days. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty bleak. It'd be nice if we had more protections for laid off workers, emotionally, financially. I mean, it really runs the gamut. Everyone has a different situation, a different experience. I have friends who got laid off from the same place and were not destroyed. So it really is very personal. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why you might feel really bad after a layoff, mainly due to stigma. My thought spiral at the beginning. Oh, like, are people, thinking about me differently? Are they looking at me differently? Do they think I'm less than now? Like, I'm less capable? That seems irrational, but like, actually, they might be thinking that about me because there's just so much stigma about laid off and unemployed workers that we're not talking about. This expert was like, there's literal discrimination happening against unemployed workers that's been documented over and over again. Basically, it's twice as hard to get a second job interview if you're unemployed than somebody who has the exact same credentials and has a current job. So, what happens if you have a hard time finding a job and people are thinking weird things about you, you're going to go deeper with those thought spirals. That can lead to this trap of long-term unemployment if you're not lucky to get out of it with a job, or if you have supportive community around you to make sure you're not getting these negative messages all the time. So I think that's one of the biggest things I learned and that I want to share with people, that we really actually need to work on this stigma piece around unemployment.
Okay, so I want to talk about some of the major reasons why workers get laid off, the on the books reasons, and then the like unspoken real reasons, because I'm specifically thinking of one of my family members who has been laid off more than once. He works as a kind of high up manager in construction, and he just turned 60. My understanding of the last time that he got laid off was because a consultant came into the company and was like, here's where you need to nip and tuck. You have too many high-level managers who are making too much money. You should like fire these 60-year-olds and replace them with 35-year-olds, and you can pay them half as much. So that laying off of older, higher paying, more experienced workers so that you can replace them with younger, lower paid workers seems like it should be illegal, but that is like out here happening all the time.
It is illegal. You could argue that that's age discrimination. It's just so hard to prove, and that's the problem.
Yeah. So can you talk about the sort of official reasons why people get laid off and then the like unofficial ones?
Yes. So I talked to an HR rep, a few of them actually for the series, and they led me into the black box of what actually goes on behind the scenes. And really what a company should be doing and what they usually say to employees and the public when they're doing layoffs is, we have a business strategy change. We've thought about this very hard, and we're doing this to improve our profits and health of the company long term.
Whoa, pause. I have to just moment of silence for the creepiness of anthropomorphizing a company. I wrote a piece for Harper's Bazaar last year about the rise of therapy speak in the workplace. One of the creepiest things that I learned writing that piece was about how mental health language is being weaponized to portray companies as living, breathing human beings in a way who have their own health. The health of the company is such a sort of pernicious turn of phrase because the company is not a person.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense that therapy speak would be extended and weaponized by companies now that companies are legally considered basically people and they, with Citizens United. So that's one major reason officially. Another official reason is economy is doing bad or the company is struggling and we just need to cut costs, even when there's a lot of research that shows that it doesn't actually always help long term. So those are the official reasons. I would say the unofficial reasons really run the gamut, like one of them being, I mean, I hate to say this because I don't want to put it in people's heads, but this is what experts told me. One of the reasons is because of your performance, which is not what one wants to hear, but that is something that companies do is they look at who is not performing to their standards or, there's this rule that tech companies use sometimes where they cut the bottom performing 10%, which is so fucking brutal.
Oh my God, it's like a breakup where you're like, oh no, it's me, it's not you, but it's you.
No, exactly.
And I think the especially shitty part about that is that it's not like a romantic relationship where you can be like, oh, this was just a bad chemistry fit that one person clocked first, in which case, screw you. It's like, if you don't want to be in this relationship, then I guess I don't either. Instead of that, it's a workplace telling you you are not the productivity robot that the health of this company needs, and thus we're gonna take away your source of survival, aka your income. It's so unbelievably dehumanizing, and I can't think of a solution. All I can say is that is brutal.
Yeah. Another reason is investor pressure. Like a company, even if it's doing fine, investors may push for layoffs behind the scenes for higher profits or because they see other companies in that sector doing layoffs. So there's this phenomenon called copycat layoffs.
Like a contagion. Like these fucking tech bros can't come up with their own idea. They just feel pressured to do what their fellow bro is doing.
Yes, exactly. And then another more nefarious reason I heard about is union organizing. It's an effective way to basically deal with a union campaign. There have been lots of examples of workers trying to organize, and then a company just decides to stop working in that particular city or place, and they shut down the entire factory or workplace. That's against the law if you can prove it, because that would be retaliation for organizing, but it's just really hard to prove.
Oh gosh, we got so many listener submitted thought spirals on this topic that I'm going to present to you later. but it really broke my heart to read through them because it does seem to me that getting laid off produces a unique sort of mindfuck that is different from other kinds of work stress or financial stress. And I'm wondering if you could speak to what makes getting laid off set you up for more overthinking compared to other types of professional distress.
Yeah. I mean, it really does feel like gaslighting. You know, like they tell you it's not about your performance, it's for these reasons, but maybe it's not because of those reasons. And you'll never know. You'll never be able to solve the mystery. So that's another reason why you might keep circling, and that's really hard. And I just have to bring it back to stigma. There's been research on like what happens to laid off workers in their relationships. And a lot of times you get blamed. There's a lot of like, maybe there was something wrong with you, or why aren't you trying hard enough to find another job?
Like your loved ones might see you differently.
Exactly. I mean, that's going to make you feel really bad. And, you know, I think another reason has to do with the myth of meritocracy. Basically, the idea that like your individual effort and work equals your individual outcomes, which we know is a lie. Right? We know that's not true. There's like so many reasons, so many systems, so many advantages and disadvantages, so much luck involved in anybody being where they are in life. I knew that intellectually, but like, I think that deep down, emotionally, because the myth of meritocracy in the US is so baked into schooling, so many narratives, it's everywhere. It's really hard to escape. I realized that emotionally, deep down, I believed in it. I thought I was safe because I worked hard,
so hard
and did a good job. And there's just something really destabilizing about thinking you're safe and then having the rug pulled out from underneath you. The ground shifts beneath your feet.
Yeah.
And so that's really destabilizing. And you're like, well, what's the point? Like, if I try and I could still get laid off, then why try? And it just makes it very clear how scary and volatile this economy is and how few protections we have.
Totally. Okay, so I want to talk about like what we can do to feel better because so much of this stress sounds like it has to do with chaos. What can folks do to restore some sense of stability? Can you talk about like some of what you've done and then what do experts have to say about it?
Yeah. First, I just want to point out that after you get laid off, prioritizing your mental health and making sure that you're good is so important because you're facing all these negative feedback loops, right? From people around you, employers, maybe even yourself. And I discovered it in my research that if you leak any negativity in a job interview, you're less likely to get hired. And so that's why sociologist Yowei Shaw said it's about knowing that this is maybe going to be a marathon, not a sprint. And it's not your fault. I think like learning about that research really helped me. Like I felt a little lighter. Another thing that's important that I would really recommend and that I tried to do is finding safe spaces to like vent about how bad you're feeling. Solidarity, like finding people who have been laid off or are laid off right now and just talking about it, talking about the negative emotions because you might be judged for sharing or expressing those negative emotions in other spaces. Like, why are you being so negative? Or you don't have the right attitude. Well, you have to get it out somehow. And it's better to not be judged for it. The last thing I'll say is, I tried lots of things and like a lot of things helped. One thing I did was to combat the shame and like isolation, that feeling of wanting to hide from my friends. I started this kind of weird project. I tricked out my basement to be like a massage parlor. I'm like obsessed with massage.
Me too.
I give massages just for like fun for friends and family. And I really like getting them. So basically I made a massage spa in my basement. I called it Yowei Shaw. The color theme is Pepto-Bismol pink.
Love. Very tacky 80s Miami vibes.
And I sent a spreadsheet around to my friends and was like, do you want to sign up? And so that's what I did that summer was like, I got very close and intimate with a lot of my friends. And that was really fun and weird.
Oh my God. I love this. And it reminds me of a YouTuber that I came across a few months ago who had just been laid off from her tech job. And similar to you, instead of jumping right into trying to find a replacement for that exact same job, she was like, you know what? I'm going to take a second to do something weird. And who knows if anything fruitful will come of it. And it's not like this is like a sign from the universe that I'm not being weird enough, but this is just what I'm going to fucking do. And she embarked on this YouTube project and she was vlogging, and it was really fun to like watch her do that experiment in real time. I don't know, like I feel like when I am encountering a problem, my instinct is to like beat that problem to death and try to fix it in a way that is really forced and really high anxiety, when so often a better approach is to like back up, slow down, acknowledge something bad has happened, and then that's okay. Get weird, touch your friends.
I mean, I would agree. And also, I was absolutely doing
The other
your
thing.
approach at the same time in parallel. I was like, every day, okay, what's my game plan? What should I do? I want to have a kid in like a few years. And then this whole like idea for Proxy came about, this new podcast. And then that was basically what I was trying to do this past year, birth this new show while I could live off of severance and unemployment and savings, pick up part-time freelance work and try to do this new thing and see what happens. One other thing, though, that I would really, really recommend in the spirit of getting weird, I decided to make a music video of a layoff interpretive pole dance and made an original layoff song. I know that it sounds crazy and weird and whatever, and it was. It was so stupid.
Will I ever find work? Guess I'll stay home and twerk. My inner voice is a jerk.
Basically, I just got it in my head that I was like, oh, this would be funny to like dress up as a Kleenex box and make a dance for like my upcoming pole recital. I pole dance as a hobby. I'm not good. And then I was like, oh no, there's no songs to dance to. There's shockingly not a layoff genre in music. And so then, and my husband's a music producer, and I just forced him to help me make a song. And honestly, I think that helped me the most.
Yeah.
Because one of the questions that I hated getting in this past year was, have you found a new job yet? Rather than having to say no and getting laid off still sucks, I could just talk about this stupid, fun project and
Hell yeah.
share, some ridiculous photos of my costume. And honestly, it was so healing just being able to like reframe this really negative event in my life and attach new meaning to it. Now, when I think about my layoff, that's the first thing I think of and I giggle.
Oh, that's awesome. It's like you have a new Pavlovian response. That fucking slaps. I love that idea. It's so smart because humor is, I would venture to say, almost always an effective coping mechanism, as is music.
Yes.
Every time something nightmarish has happened in my life, I would never share any of these things publicly, but like I'm out here writing songs about it too,
Really? I love that. Doesn't it feel like magic?
Yes.
Like you can just, by making a song or a piece of art or like doing a stupid fun bit, you feel better.
Yeah, it's magic.
It's magic.
It really is. I'm so glad we got there. What a much needed vibe shift. And making a dumb song, none of these things are dumb. They're just
It's very
maybe
dumb.
goofy.
Objectively dumb.
Making a goofy song will not fix all of your problems, but so much of the pain of getting laid off is the emotional toll. And whatever you can do to sort of like relieve some of that is going to be like a huge part of the more practical solution, because engaging in goofiness is something that's actually within your control amid so much that isn't. And we all deserve relief, and the benefits of that relief may very well help us navigate whatever's next. Okay, I want to get into some of these listener-submitted thought spirals. On every episode of Magical Overthinkers, I have my Magical Overthinkers Club, meaning those followers on Instagram at Magical Overthinkers, submit some anonymous thought spirals on the subject of the week, and I'm going to read some of them to you, and we can just spontaneously react. This thought spiraler says, I got laid off in April. Didn't start a new job till the end of May, and I still have not recovered. First of all, that sounds like a really, actually very fast turnaround.
That's no time. No time in layoff land.
But I can relate to the experience of just sort of like white knuckling your way through an issue, solving it quickly, but still feeling extremely negatively affected by it because you didn't process what that really felt like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Someone says in the wake of their layoff, they can't help but think, was this the wrong career? Was my degree a mistake? Do I need to change everything?
I mean, that's so real. The couple that I profiled in my series, his job was most likely taken over by AI. And he had the same question of like, I have spent 10 years getting my degree and then master's degree and then experience in this very particular field that might not exist in a few years. I think here's a few things. If your sector is not going under, it's probably best for you to stay within the sector that you have already spent a lot of time and effort working on and building up. There's actually been studies, and like you will see on average more of a decline in wages when you switch careers and sectors in the long run. But obviously, if your sector is going under because of AI or whatever the reason, then it makes sense to try to find a new path.
Whoa. Or if your sector makes you fucking miserable, because that's a variable in this equation too.
Absolutely.
But also maybe wait until the most activated emotional response to that stimulus, whether it's a layoff or your job disappointing you in some other way, has passed to make any big decisions. Because what I'll say is that something interesting that I learned while writing The Age of Magical Overthinking, something that I learned from the late business writer Peter Drucker, is that it can actually be helpful to make an urgent versus important matrix in order to identify which workplace challenges are important but not immediately urgent, like deciding whether or not to change sectors, versus those that are urgent but not important, like some silly little fire drill that could actually be delegated to someone else. It's just good to have a tool like that when you're panicking to help make wise long-term decisions. This next thought spiral says, working notices. You can lay me off at a moment notice, but I have to work 2 weeks after I quit?
It's wild.
Holy shit. I completely forgot. I was laid off once.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute, Amanda.
I forgot.
You buried this memory so deeply?
Yes.
Because, like, that's so wild.
Recovered memory
Just
therapy is
remember.
real. It was, well, because before we started recording, we were talking about times in your career when you have nothing to lose, and how that can actually be extremely liberating. It was a time in my career when I had nothing to lose. It was a part-time job, but it was weird. I think they felt so bad laying me off that they actually did allow me to work for 2 weeks longer. And I was putting in, maybe 10% of my effort, let me tell you. But I was grateful for the checks. But I didn't take it as personally. I was 22, you know? I was in my hope phase. I had not dedicated so much of myself to this company, so it was okay. I forgot about that. Okay, so many thought spirals from people who are saying they got laid off and didn't find a job until 6 months later, 9 months later, 19 months post-layoff, and are still unemployed and struggling.
That's so brutal. It gets harder the longer you're unemployed, the more likely you'll be discriminated against in the job market.
What can we do? Like, is there anything we can do grassroots style?
Yeah, I mean, I think the recent trend of people streaming their layoff on TikTok has actually been really amazing and destigmatizing. I talked to an HR rep about this, like, what do you feel about that? And she's like, I love it because then it puts us on notice. It makes us have to do better. Otherwise, we'll end up on TikTok. So I think
Totally.
that's cool. I think, like, talking about it like we are now, talking about the stigma, talking about what happened, talking about how bad it feels, like the more we talk about it, the less the stigma, I think. I mean, it's pretty wild that we don't have more of a movement around unemployment benefits and this particular lane of worker protections. We need better regulation. Like the Warren Act is not enough. That's the only regulation we have.
This next thought spiral says, how do I motivate myself to work when I'm just a number to a corporation and can be discarded?
That is so real. So real. I mean,
Don't do your best. Just don't.
yeah, I think you don't, like, just dial it in.
Totally.
You know?
I mean, when I worked in my series of corporate jobs earlier in my career, I would put in 65%. That's what I always said.
Yeah, dial it in. And also, like, you can organize with your coworkers to make it a better workplace. Whenever I started doing that, I honestly cared more about my job.
Yeah.
Like, I liked my job better. I liked my workplace better because I was trying to make it better and I was, like, more connected to the people around me.
Such a good tidbit because the 35% you're saving on productivity you can spend on making your workplace more human. This next thought spiral says, I freak out anytime my boss says they need to talk to me. I always end up asking if I'm fired.
So layoff anxiety has been studied and it's a real phenomenon. There's actually this website where basically people talk about rumors about layoffs at their companies, and it's a very scary place to be on. That is something I heard a lot from people I interviewed. This is why there's decreased productivity and morale when layoffs happen. This is like one of the reasons why, doing layoffs as a short-term cash saving strategy doesn't always work out, because of the turnover, because workers are feeling so insecure about their jobs. That's exactly why.
In that same vein, someone says that feeling when you can't log into a work platform and you think you're getting laid off. You can't check your email and you're like, oh, here I go.
I heard from somebody who couldn't log into Slack while in the car to the hospital to see her dying husband who was dying of cancer. Just like, it's brutal out there. There's so many horror stories.
Speaking of horror stories, next thought spiral says, why do they do layoffs just before the December holidays? Why not just wait like 3 more goddamn weeks?
That's a good question. I think it has to do with the way a lot of companies structure their budget. What is their year and their quarter? Like, layoffs are more likely to happen on the quarters, every quarter, because that's when the numbers are being drawn up and assessed.
The next thought spiral says, please discuss the practice of laying off right before becoming eligible for pension. Gross.
I mean, that's another, what you were saying earlier, Amanda, like another unofficial, more nefarious reason why people get laid off. I mean, none of the people that I talk to face this issue, but I'm sure it happens.
Yeah,
Companies will do anything that's legal that they can get away with to save money.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you legally can fire or lay off a woman for being pregnant as long as you don't say that. You can fire or lay off anyone for any reason as long as you don't name the illegal reason.
Exactly.
It's fucked up. We'll do one last thought spiral. There are so many, but we'll just do one more. Someone writes, my uncle worked for Macy's in New York City. He was and is a big part of the Thanksgiving parade. He was let go, but then still expected to volunteer for the parade.
What? That's delusional.
Super manipulative.
I hope that this uncle did not show up to volunteer, because that is just disrespectful.
This is the mind fuck that we are all set up to experience, that like your job is so much of your self-worth and your meaning making. If you are like so proud to work for Macy's and get to be part of the Macy's Thanksgiving parade, and like that has been your life for decades,
yeah,
they could manipulate you to do whatever and gaslight you into thinking that that's your choice.
Yeah.
Bummer. Okay, I've got one last question for you, and that is just, what is the number one thing that you think people are overthinking with regard to layoffs? And what is the number one thing you think people are underthinking?
Wow, this is a good question. Overthinking why you got laid off. You'll never know. So there's no point in overthinking that, because you'll drive yourself crazy. You should just tell yourself a story that makes you feel better.
Thinking is out, Delulu is in.
Just lie to yourself. No, I mean, it's just like you'll never know. So what's the point of torturing yourself? In terms of underthinking, layoff stigma, unemployment stigma is real. So if you're feeling bad after getting laid off, there are structural reasons why you feel that way. You're not just being weird or over emotional. So please don't blame yourself. And then, yeah, I would love it if we could have more protections for laid off workers and workers in general. That would be great. And reach out to your coworkers and friends who've been laid off and be supportive. Help them out with recommendations. Like, that's the number one way that you can beat the hiring discrimination or push through it, is if you get an inside the house company recommendation from someone. So network, even though you won't want to network.
That's the work smarter, not harder thing. And then, for sure, if you feel moved to write a silly song and dress up like a box of tissues, pop the fuck off. And of course, listen to Proxy. Yowei, if people want to keep up with you and your work, where can they find you?
I'm on Instagram at Proxy Podcast and also Yowei Shaw. And you can find our website and listen to all the episodes at proxypodcast.com. And I just want to say, I know we've been talking a lot about layoffs, and I just went very deep on layoffs with this 3-part series. We are leaving layoffs behind, and we're going to be doing all kinds of episodes about all kinds of niche emotional conundrums, like introverts who are resentful of the extroverts in their life, somebody who feels dumb for having a bad memory. We have a band therapy episode, which is going to be about how to resolve group conflict amongst childhood friends. We have a lot of juicy stuff coming down the line.
I am so excited to listen. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. This was so fun.
Thank you all so much for listening. Here's the part of the episode where I offer a little evidence-based tidbit for how we overthinkers can get out of our own heads this week. This one has to do with a very simple tip for folks who can't stop catastrophizing. I feel like I am a professional worrier. If I allow myself to, I will worry from the second I wake up in the morning to the moment I fall asleep at night about concerns as silly as why my Instagram post didn't get very much engagement to those as legitimate as the election. So I want to provide a little piece of advice that I learned from an academic article called The Patient with Excessive Worry that was published in 2014. The study's abstract, very relatably, opens like this. Worry is a normal response to uncertainty. Education, empathetic support, reassurance, and passage of time usually ameliorate ordinary worries. However, these common sense strategies for dealing with transient worries often prove ineffective for patients with excessive worry. Something that the study recommends is to set aside or even formally schedule a block of worrying time. If you're someone who deals with excessive worry and you're a calendar user like myself, it can be an effective stress management technique to set aside maybe an hour of your day as your worrying time when you get to just go ham on those irrational thought spirals. This can encourage you to defer those concerns to your designated worry time and also help you gain perspective and awareness of them. So with that, thank you again for listening. Until the next spiral, remember, think it over. Just don't overthink it. Magical Overthinkers was created and hosted by Amanda Montell and edited by Jordan Moore of The Pod Cabin. Our theme music is by Casey Kolb. Thank you to our magical manager, Katie Epperson, coordinator, Reese Oliver, and Network Studio 71. Be sure to follow the pod on Instagram at Magical Overthinkers. We're also on YouTube, link in show notes, and ad-free episodes as well as behind-the-scenes extras are available on the Magical Overthinkers Substack at amandamontell.substack.com.